Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Nassim Rodin. We're going to be studying the Talmud with you. What is the Talmud, and what is the direction that I will be taking? And who am I? So we'll start with what is the Talmud. The Talmud was compiled approximately 2,000 years ago, over a period of 700 years. It is a compilation of the oral tradition. What does that mean? Well, the Jewish people had a written Torah, the Bible, the 5 books of Moses. And the Talmud, together with the Bible, there was a tradition of oral transmission from Moses, from God to Moses. Now, this oral transmission became the basis of the interpretation of the written Torah. So it's very important to understand when a person comes to study the Talmud or comes to study the Torah, it's very important for them to understand that there's the Bible, there's the Tanakh, the 5 books of Moses, and the rest of the Bible, the Testament. And then what we have is the Talmud, or the oral Torah, the oral teachings. Why is it oral? Because for thousands of years, it was only given over orally. Now, what is that oral teaching? So what it is basically is a compilation of a whole bunch of things. The first is, in the Tanakh, in the Bible, there are many, many mitzvot, commandments that God wants a Jewish person to do, and also a Gentile to do. Well, all of the details, how a person's supposed to behave, how of all the mitzvot, of all the commandments, those aren't written clearly inside the Bible. Those are part of the oral tradition. The oral tradition elaborates and elucidates on the biblical, the mitzvahs that are inside of the Bible. Number 2, the oral tradition says, well, what if a new thing comes up? How are we going to deal with a new phenomena, a new tradition, a new culture, a new world view? How do we deal with that? So the answer is that together with the oral tradition were 13 rules, that through those 13 rules we can go and decipher and look into the Bible and find a way, using these different logical rules of logic, we're able to figure out, I would say the great rabbis of the Talmud, or the great rabbis throughout the generations, were able to figure out the correct way to deal with what God would want from us, to deal with things such as electricity, such as modern banking, and such as the internet. All of these things using rules that related from the Tanakh. And these are also part of the Talmud. As well, in the Talmud, we have a compilation of all of the different customs and community customs and boundaries, things that were set up in order to protect Judaism, to make sure that a person wouldn't go and do something which they're not allowed to do. So it's called like a fence around the law. So there's certain things which may be biblically permitted, but as the rabbis, with the power that was invested upon them, they said, well, we know people need some boundaries, and these boundaries are also, every generation, every group of sages decided on different boundaries, and these became part of the Talmud. But most of all, the Talmud, as I said before, is how we see the relationship between the oral tradition, so the laws of the Torah, and how those relate to the verses in the Torah, in the Bible. Okay, so once we're going to study the Talmud, I'm different than other teachers of the Torah, teachers of the Talmud. I'm not going to be taking, taking things out of context and bringing some teaching of a specific rabbi. Rather, I'm going to be teaching the Talmud as it is. So much of what we're going to study is how we find that specific laws and rulings are interrelated to their biblical understanding. This is the intellect and the way of thinking of the Talmud. And this allows us to be able to to understand relationships between two separate ways of thinking things, or two separate perspectives. Now, also, the Talmud and Torah law have to be focused on action. So in Judaism, there's no such thing. We don't study things as a polemic or a philosophy, right? Everything has to relate to our practical life. So therefore, the pieces of the Talmud that I will be studying and I'll be teaching in regards to people who are not Jewish and Gentiles will be Talmudic passages that relates to them as well. So to how the Talmud views the way Gentiles are supposed to serve God, etc. So we're going to study and stimulate our minds and understand the depth of Talmudic wisdom, but we will also bring it back into the practical behavior of a just society, of Gentiles, of any person, any society, and how it relates back to how it relates to the Talmud. So this means, if you to give it in a very simple, clear, organized way, number one, we're going to be studying the Talmud itself. Different than talking about the Talmud, or like about Confucius. We're going to be studying the teachings of the Talmud itself. Number two, to understand the teachings of the Talmud, many of them are going to be how to see how a oral tradition or a legalistic tradition relates to the Bible. And number three, it will also have a practical component in human life, because this is the way that Jewish people, we always study the Talmud. There has to be, maybe if you would give the example of Gong Fu, or of Chinese wushu, there is also the meditative practice, but it also has to come to the physical fighting, so to speak. The same thing is related to Judaism. The practical, the soul, and the body must always come together. And that's how we're going to study the Talmud. So therefore, I've chosen to begin, we're going to be studying in Tractate Sanhedrin, which is the tractate of the Talmud, the volume of the Talmud which speaks about courts, okay, and how to establish courts. And over here in page 96, side 1, I'll try to send a link where you can look at it yourself. We'll be going through the Talmud itself and some different interpretations. This relates specifically to the 7 Noahide laws. Now, the 7 Noahide laws are the foundation of Jewish tradition for all of humanity. Meaning to say, what are the laws or what are the cultural norms that Judaism believes, and cultural rights and wrongs that Judaism believes the nations of the world need to have as well. This is not specifically a religious thing, but it's more of a socio-cultural behavior, which also has some religious facts are connected to it as well. So, without any further ado, I'm going to now go straight into the Talmud itself. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught us, Sheva mitzvot nitztavu b'nei Noach. So the children of Noah were commanded 7 mitzvahs, 7 different commandments. Dinin, the first of them are dinin. What does dinin mean? Din means justice, judgment, courts. The very first commandment is that every community and every society must have just courts, a just legal system. Ubirkat Hashem means the disrespect of God. A non-Jew is not allowed to disrespect God, or so to speak, to curse the higher power, the higher one. Avodah Zarah means worshipping any false god. Gilui Arayot is adultery. Non-Jewish people are also commanded against adultery. Shfichut Damim means spilling blood, murder. Vegazel, and thievery. Ve'ever minachai, and eating the flesh of a living animal. So I'm going to give it outside. There are 7 different commandments that every human being must follow. The first is, it must do and not do. The first is, having a court of justice. The second is cursing, so to speak, God. The third is worshipping idols. The fourth is adultery. The fifth, and adultery also has within it also incest and other such behaviors, sexual deviances. Shfichut damim is murder. Gazel is thievery. And ever minachai. And we find the last will be eating the flesh of a living animal. Now, this is a very, very fascinating thing, because what is the first way? If I'm going to be a Talmudic sage, what will be the first thing that I'm going to go and look at? How? Well, 1 second. This is a tradition. Well, this is an oral tradition. Where do we find the source of this tradition in the Bible? How do we connect that? Is there a source? We'll get there in a second. Before that, there are a few other sages that had different opinions. Rabbi Hananya ben Gamla, Omer, Af al hadam minachai. Rabbi Hananya ben Gamla said, it's not only eating the flesh that was torn off of a living animal. So let's say there's an animal, someone went and sliced a piece of meat off of the living animal, or sliced a leg off of it. It says even blood from a living animal. There are certain countries in Africa, for example, where they'll slaughter a beast and they'll drink from the blood. This is not allowed. Rabbi Hananya ben Gamla, he says this. Rabbi Chidaka Omer, Rabbi Chidaka says, Af ala sirus. Also, sirus. What does sirus mean? Sirus means to cause an animal to, or a human being, to not be able to have children. Okay, so any living being, we cannot cause them to not be able to have children. Rabbi Shimon Omer Av ala kishuf. Rabbi Shimon says also on kishuf, which is magics or dark arts. Rabbi Yossi Omer Kol ha'amur b'parshat kishuf ben Noach muzhar alav. Anything that relates to kishuf, a child of Noach, meaning to say Noach is a child of Noach is commanded on them. What does that mean? Ben Noach, the child of Noach. We're going to take now a little sequitur. We said before that these take a little to the side. So we said that these so far we've had 7 plus 3 different commandments that Noahides are commanded to do. Who are Noahides? Why Noahides? And the answer is that if one looks through the Bible, the beginning of the whole the beginning of the Bible relates with Adam, but then there's the flood, and all of the people at that time were completely wiped out. Right? The flood came in, and who was the only people, the family that survived? The family that survived was Noah and his children. So therefore, all of humanity today comes from the descendants of Noah. Now, we have one more thing. Rabbi Yossi says, we said that we're going to, 1 second, I'm trying to help a friend of mine with a mitzvah. Here. I apologize, but according to Jewish tradition, the action of a mitzvah is more important than anything else. So there's a friend of mine who wanted to take a loan or needed some help, so I went and helped him. So this is also a teaching. Now, all of a sudden, the Talmud, since the Talmud is built in its own structure, and it's built very much like a spider's web, so it'll go off in many different directions. And then it comes back upon itself. It's almost like the internet. So now, all of a sudden, the Talmud is going to quote something that Rabbi Yossi said. If we remember, we're going back to Rabbi Yossi. He said that anything that relates to magic and so on, a son of Noach is not allowed to do. So, what does Rabbi Yossi say? 1 second. How do we know where in the Bible this specific this specific commandment or negative commandment, where do we know in the Bible? And when the person studies Talmud, a lot of times they use their thumb. This is the tradition of the Jewish tradition. So where do we know in the Bible that this Talmudic prohibition exists? How do we know this? Where's the source in the Bible? And the answer is, the Bible tells us, Lo yimatze b'cha ma'avir b'no uvito ba'esh kosem ksamim me'onen u'menachesh u'mechashef v'chover chever v'shoel ov v'idoni v'doresh el hametim. So, the Torah says that when the Jewish people went into Israel, God commanded them that they should not do all sorts of acts of ritual magic or all sorts of rituals that related to serving idols, including magic. Why? This is interesting. Because the reason why you Jews, God speaks to the Jews, and he says the reason why the Jewish people receive this land is because the nations beforehand have lost it. Not because you're so much greater, but the nations that were living there before have lost it because of their acts of idol worship and magic. Now, if this is the Talmudic logic and reasoning, why would you say that they were thrown out of the land? The nations before the Jewish people were in the land were non-Jews. And the Jewish people received this holy land of Israel because of the nations that were there had sinned. Well, what did they do wrong? They worshipped, they did practices of evil magic. And they received a punishment. Therefore, magic is something that's wrong and is supposed to be punished. And therefore, from this we can learn that Gentiles are prohibited against magic. So we can say that again. Where is the source that Gentiles are not allowed to practice the dark arts and magic? Is because since the Jewish people received the land, that the Gentiles that were there before lost it because of their occult practices. So therefore that must mean that their occult practices are wrong, and that must mean that they're commanded not to do them. There we go. V'lo alash elam ken, he's here. This is what it says. God does not give punishment unless God said, unless this is obviously there was a commandment not to do this. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Rabbi Elazar says, Af al hakilayim. Mutar, he says also to mixtures. Kilayim means mixtures. What mixtures are we talking about? So the sons of Noah are allowed to wear mixtures, and they're allowed to plant mixtures, but they're not allowed to take a horse and mount it on a donkey, for example, to create a mule, or to graft trees. We're going to see now. The Talmud doesn't even explain this. I mean to say there's a mixture. Let's take a step back. The Talmud accepts and understands that as if, right, we're jumping into the Talmud and we have very little knowledge of Judaism. I mean, I do, but many of the people here don't. So the Talmud remember the Talmud is having a conversation. The Talmud is speaking about a conversation between different rabbis and different communities that had some knowledge already. So therefore, there's some knowledge which is missing here, and I'll give you the extra pieces. The first piece is in regards to mixtures of clothing. So Jewish people are not allowed to wear wool and linen clothing mixed together. So wool and linen are not allowed to be mixed together and make shirts. Also to plant. So to plant fruits, two fruits next to each other, and then it'll grow together into a new fruit. Or this is not allowed for Jews. But for non-Jews, these are okay. Both of this, the wearing such clothes, planting. However, when you talk about mounting two animals on each other, or you talk about grafting trees, this non-Jewish people are not allowed. Now, what's the simple question? The simple question is, where do we know this from? How is this true? Where does this come from? Okay? What does that mean? Where does this come from? Where is the source in the Bible for this? It doesn't say it here. So, what we're going to do now is spend a little bit of time going through some different interpretations, right? Remember, the Talmud was finished, I would say, almost 1,800 years ago. Was finished compilation. But since then, to understand it and to dig deeply into it and to really understand all of the details, Jewish scholars have been debating over these details for 1,800 years. So there's a lot of information here. And what I would like to say is, it's well known that Jewish scholars have in the past 100 years received a third of all the Nobel Prizes. And the greatest scholars happen to be Jewish. Now, in the Talmud is Jewish wisdom. So the greatest scholarship and wisdom is inside of the Talmud. So now we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at different interpretations. And then we'll go a little bit more into the Talmud. And then we'll take a break. So, now, there's a question which comes about, which is like this. Who was commanded these commandments? Was it Noah, or was it Adam? Because Adam was a human being. He was the first human being. It only makes sense that God would give him certain commandments, what to do and what not to do. Not only Noah, right? Although we are all descendants of Noah, but the first person, wouldn't God at least allude to him these mitzvahs, right? It's an interesting question. And if not, why would Adam be punished if he didn't follow these mitzvahs? If it's like God says, it's almost like you're walking in a minefield. You don't know what's right or wrong. You do one certain thing and then boom, you're done. So certainly God said also these commandments, these mitzvahs, to Adam as well. So we're going to go a little bit and dig deeper into this. Now, one more step, one more important thing of knowledge it's needed to know, is that until Noah, humanity was not allowed to slaughter an animal and eat its flesh. How do we know this? Because God said to Adam in the Bible, you may eat from all the fruits of the land. So fruits of the land, not fruits of the beasts. Okay. Now, so let's go and try to see the next